I didn't say a thing. Okay. Do you have prayer requests you would like for us to remember, and especially might want for our group here, or in general, but do you have a request you'd like to mention, or a praise for that matter, you'd like to share?
Thank you, Lord, that our brother is back in church.
Yes. So good to see Rich and Patty. I had to catch up on hugs with Patty, so it's been a while since I had a chance. Okay. Yes, remember Kyle, and when Chris started, I thought he was having a very bad reaction to some customer service or whatever, something like that. So it's not at all good to have to go home because of a physical situation, but in some ways that's a little better than interactional situations. But yes, let's remember Kyle. World Cup is on. You probably have heard of that. And that means not only Gospel Publishing Mission of HIM, but also I read someplace many evangelicals are trying to take advantage of this opportunity to share the gospel. And so let's ask the Lord to make it effective. It is a time when the whole world gathers in these spots, and I think there are 8 different cities this time. 2 or 6 here in the States, and 1 in Canada, 1 in Mexico. So let's pray that God's truth will get out and He will be able to draw people to Him. And then when it is literature, such as the Gospel Publishing Mission, some of those books will be pitched right away, whatever, but some of them will last and be passed on. So it's seed that is sown and has possibility of long-term impact.
We've been working naturally. We've been gone. Sometimes I do laundry and then I go back. But you all are aware of our neighbors who are very vile. I've just been asking the Lord that when we go, even when we're not here, because things she says, the children shouldn't say. Nobody should. So I've been asking the Lord to just like subdue these people. And we were there the whole time, the past 2 weeks. There was just one outburst, very short, no cursing, no yelling, no coming and, because these people use binoculars to see from their house to her house. And she had a very nice group of people come yesterday, and she said, those neighbors say nothing, 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 and I want to thank the Lord for that.
Yes.
I just don't have enough praise in my mouth,
Yeah.
because this is horrid trauma. And there's only 4 people, there's only 4 houses on that whole little piece of road she lives. And they're all aware that some of them are related to her and they have been kind of
Yeah.
especially the one. But God is good.
Yes.
And I thank you.
Yes. So let's thank the Lord and then pray that it will go beyond just subduing some of the outbursts, but also opening hearts and minds to truth. And God is able to save any of us. So.
Well, I think, Lord, too, it may seem like a small thing, but I am thankful for the times when you look back and you're like, oh, it was a little over a week ago, it was one of those 90-degree days. We had left Williamsport with our van, and my husband was gone out of town, and our van the fuel pump ended up going on it. It happened to L&L.
Okay.
And I was just like, thank you. I mean, it was a place for me to park, a place I could leave the van, I could call a neighbor to come pick me up. But like I said, we had just come from Williamsport, and that could have happened along the highway, and with it being so hot, and I was just, I just am so thankful for the Lord's care, even right down to things like that.
Well, that's only small if you're not in the van, but if you are, it's big. So yes, thank the Lord. Steve Hill, would you lead us, please, in our opening prayer? Well, you are aware, if you have a quarterly of following, thank you, Stephen, that we are studying great topics of wisdom literature. Typically, we call Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Or sometimes we call them poetical books. The scheduled lessons that we have in our curriculum only cover Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. I put cover in quotes because it doesn't cover any of the books. It just picks out some great topics from them. I believe that Herald and Banner has a whole quarter on the Psalms, so that would cover another of the books. I kind of doubt that Song of Solomon comes up in the curriculum anyplace. Because of some schedule situations, I'm supposed to teach 3 weeks from today, July 5. So I actually plan to look at Song of Solomon that day instead of the one in the quarterly. So if you want the stuff from the quarterly, do what you have to do most of the time when I teach and read the quarterly. Get it from there. But I, at least as of now, plan to look at Song of Solomon. That happens to be the day after our anniversary, so it might be appropriate to look at Song of Solomon that day. So I don't plan on anyway, unless something changes, looking at the topic wisdom and social responsibility from Proverbs 19 and 22, not because that topic is unimportant, but because I think we hear way less from Song of Solomon than we should. Song of Solomon, and it's such a delightful, meaningful song that I wanted to look at it. Today, however, we're in Proverbs. And before looking at Proverbs 3, 1 through 18, or actually 1 through 20, I would like to include, let's zoom out and see some other background information. Proverbs, wisdom literature. We're familiar, I hope, with Proverbs in the Bible. What we may not realize is that wisdom literature doesn't exist just in the Bible. The same is true for creation accounts, for flood epics, for philosophy in general. It's not just in the Bible that we find those types of literature. Someplace over 40 collections of Proverbs have been discovered so far in the ancient Near East, the same geographical region as the Bible came from. And most of those actually predate our book of Proverbs. They've been found in Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Aramaic, and Egyptian contexts. And interestingly, most of those collections are actually written by a king to his son or his sons, which is similar to what we have here in Proverbs. Just 3 examples that caught my attention from some that I had available. And those of you who have listened to me for a while and know that if it's Old Testament, I'm probably passing on to you much of what I pass on is what I received from my Old Testament professor in seminary, Dr. David Dorsey, who is now with the Lord. Had a tremendous impact on my life and thinking. So these are ones I found in my notes from that class. But example of Proverbs from other collections that are not the biblical Proverbs. Alone is sweet, but repayment is a grief. Build like a lord, live like a slave. Build like a slave, live like a lord. Tell a lie, then if you tell the truth, it will be deemed a lie. Now that's different wording, but you can recognize some of those. We have the wolf story for that last one. There's biblical proverbs that talk about lenders and repayment of loans. In the Sumerian collection, one of the older ones, there are lots of proverbs about the fox. And I grew up with Brer Rabbit and the fox. These proverbs especially characterize the fox as feeling very self-important. Now, I don't know whether Dr. Dorsey changed this to make it sound a little more cultured or whether it's just the way it was. We would probably, outside of this context, use a different word than is used here, but the fox urinated in the ocean and said, "The whole ocean is my urine." I'm not sure which the biblical proverb is that corresponds to that one, but now some scholars say that these other writings or scriptures among different cultures prove that the Bible is not unique, and in fact they will teach that all the Bible does is kind of pick up on and copy what's already going on all around it. And as I say, most of these collections predate our biblical book of Proverbs. They will say the same thing about the creation stories that are found in other cultures, the accounts of the flood. Don't be bothered if you run into that idea. We understand that the Bible communicates and presents truth. These others, corresponding, kind of similar accounts or proverbs, are human reflections of that truth. That is, they're kind of like distant mirrors of that light, that they reflect that light and therefore actually give testimony that there is true truth. But the other thing they do is, as men turned away from God, they were still influenced by truth that we have in the Holy Scriptures, but they were more and more distant from that. So their reflections of truth became more and more distorted. Those accounts in the other cultures are actually sinful humans' perversions of the truth. And some of those are very perverted. Some of them, such as some of these proverbs, are actually pretty close. They may be still communicating truth in different words. When they communicate truth, it's because it's God's truth. When they change that truth in any way, it's because they have departed from the truth. All truth is God's truth. Now, in our book of Proverbs, some of the Proverbs just simply identify wise and the opposite, foolish behavior. This is wise, this is foolish. This is good, this is bad. And we need to know what is wise and foolish. Otherwise, we might think that it's wise to act foolishly if we don't know the difference, which, by the way, is one of the confusions that our culture and our society today lives with. Many people just don't know. Many, I think, even of some of the things that we are very concerned about. I think of certain words that are used, and I'm constantly surprised when people in the news who even profess to be, and I'm not saying they aren't Christians and that they use words that I grew up weren't supposed to use. But if they've grown up with that all of their lives, they probably have no concept that there's any other way to think about it. So we need to know what is indeed wise and foolish. They can identify wise and foolish behavior by spotlighting characteristic behavior of a wise or, conversely, of a foolish person, by giving examples of good and not good behavior, by stating the relative value of different behaviors. This is better than that. Or by giving admonition. Do, don't. So some proverbs just simply identify what is wise behavior, what is foolish. Some proverbs encourage wise behavior by pointing out the advantages or the good consequences, the value of wise behavior. Or conversely, the disadvantages, the bad consequences, the valuelessness of foolish behavior. You ought to be wise and live wisely. If you do, this is what follows. Don't live foolishly, because this is the result of that lifestyle. And some proverbs instruct by expressing general truths and insights that are important for wise living. Many a man pursues wisdom, but he does not always catch up with it. That's from Pulpit Helps, in case you wanted to know. Well, that's what Proverbs is about. It is a tremendous help to anyone who is pursuing wise living and wants to actually catch up with it. So if that's you, go to the Proverbs. I think one of the helpful and even necessary aspects of this zooming out view is the nature of a proverb. Now, the Hebrew word that is translated proverb probably shouldn't be translated proverb. Often these are much longer than what we think of as proverbs. We think of proverbs as just a line or two. A stitch in time saves 9. Even of just a few words. These proverbs are often longer and often have a broader meaning than what we think of as the things that we would call our own proverbs. Maybe a better translation would be something like wise sayings. So these are the Proverbs of Solomon, or Solomon's wise sayings. The English Oxford Dictionary, where else would you go for clear and definite and authoritative definitions, defines a proverb as a short, pithy saying in common use. And that's where maybe some of the biblical proverbs or the Hebrew word for proverb is a little bit beyond that. They aren't always so short and pithy, whatever pithy means. Have to go to the Oxford English Dictionary to find out. Somebody whose name I don't recognize said the wisdom of many, defines a proverb as the wisdom of many and the wit of one. Kind of distilling this broadly understood wisdom and stating it in a memorable way. But I think perhaps one of the most important things that we need to understand about the biblical proverbs is that a proverb is not a promise. It is rather a statement of what is a wise way to live, and therefore it makes sense to live that way. It's a truism, and we need to be very careful in interpreting and applying and even teaching and preaching the Proverbs, that we don't confuse these genres, these two different types. I remember in reading many years ago now, Bunyan's Pilgrim Progress, and one of the people in there was Mr. Clip Promise. And he would take a promise from Scripture and clip it and say, well, that isn't really what it's saying. And if I remember correctly, I didn't go back to check today, but if I remember correctly, some of the promises that Mr. Clip Promise clipped were actually Proverbs. If that be true, he wasn't clipping promises. He was clipping Proverbs. Generally speaking, Proverbs are not intended to be infallible statements that are valid for every person or situation. Rather, they tell us what is generally or usually the case. We could say, all other things being equal, this is the situation. That quote came from an author who wrote an article called "Barking Dogs Never Bite, Except Now and Then." And if you think about Proverbs from our own culture, you'll find that there are Proverbs that say, that we spout off all the time, but they appear to contradict each other. For instance, absence makes the heart grow fonder, or absence makes the fond heart wander, or out of sight, out of mind. Those all express truth, but none of them can be taken as an absolute truth that always applies to every person in every situation. How about this? There'd still be a few people in here that might be, well, no, I won't say that. Scratch that, eliminate it completely. There are some people in the world who are considering marriage. I have some advice for you. Careful. Look before you leap. And remember, he who hesitates is lost. Some biblical proverbs appear to be true for all times and all situations, like cool water to a thirsty soul is good news from a far country. Or a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. But many of them, and in fact many that you and I would never even think to say, it will always, forever and ever, amen, to every person, every situation, be exactly like this, are the type that are saying, this is the general truth. This is what wise living looks like. All other things being equal, it will come out this way. But they do not deny exceptions, special circumstances, situations where in this particular case, it may not happen exactly that way. This is especially true in those proverbs that we mentioned earlier that encourage wise behavior by pointing to the consequences. A soft answer turneth away wrath. How many of you would say, if you're in one of those conflicts with a neighbor down the road that is very wrathful at the moment and very loud at the moment, Julene, all you need to do is speak back softly, and instantly all that's gone. Is that proverb not true? Are we clipping a promise when we say, well, maybe not? No, it's not a promise, it's a proverb. One that I am especially concerned about because I have heard it from probably right here, taught years ago. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And what I understood from that teacher was, if my child turns out of the way, either, and I have taught that child correctly, that child must somehow, before he or she dies, get back to the Lord. Cannot be lost, because it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. On the other hand, if my child turns away, that proves, and persists in that proves that I failed to train him up in the way he should go. And I think the first part of that is doctrinally erroneous because it eliminates free will of our children. If their salvation, their staying in the paths of the Lord depends on my teaching them correctly, then they have no choice if I indeed train them up as they should go. The other way of looking at it, if my child goes astray, it's because I failed. That says two things to me. One is it puts a whole lot of guilt on a lot of people, parents, that I don't think God would put on them. And I don't think it's fair for us, even trying to avoid being Mr. Clip Promise and hold to this truth. It is true, but it's not a promise. The other thing is, who among us would ever say that we have perfectly trained up our children in the way they should go? And if there's no one who can claim that, then no one could claim this if it were a promise. What we need to do is understand these proverbs are not promises, they are proverbs. I'm taking a bit of time here, but I think this is something we don't always clarify in our circles, and therefore, in an honest zeal to be faithful to the truth of the Word, we end up misusing the Word and therefore being erroneous in our attempt to be true. And I think that if we can just grasp that there's a difference between a promise and a proverb, it'll go a long way to help us. But even proverbs must be applied wisely. They express wisdom, but they must be applied wisely. That's true of any truth. Even theology, you can apply these in ways that are self-serving, ways that are misunderstanding. Another important thing to remember about the Proverbs, this is kind of the opposite. Proverbial truth is often expressed paradigmatically. That's from Dr. Dorsey, so if you don't like the word, when you get to heaven, you can take him to task about it. That is, many times the general truth is expressed by a very concrete, specific example. Let's just use one of ours. A stitch in time saves 9. Stitching, that has to do with sewing. And if it's up to me, I'll never get anything out of that proverb because I can't stitch anything, and definitely not in time. But if you're a seamstress or a seamster, no, I guess it's a tailor. If you sew, then you can apply this. But the rest of us, like me, it has nothing to say to us, right? No. That's what it means by they're expressed paradigmatically. They use a very concrete example to express the general truth, but you and I had better not say, oh, I don't sew, so I can skip that one. There's truth in it for all of us. And another thing about the Proverbs that we should notice is that contrary to basically all the rest of the Bible and all other or most other genres of literature, a proverb is intended to be pondered individually. So this is the one book in the Bible where, at least in parts of it, you can throw out the general principle of context is king. And you can't rightly interpret any particular verse or saying without looking at the broader context. These are proverbs. They are those, maybe not totally short and maybe not super pithy, but they're those reduced, compressed expressions of general wisdom. And don't be looking around before and after to figure out what this one means. It stands alone. It's intended to be pondered individually. This is one place where the atomistic approach, Dr. Dorsey's word, is very appropriate when studying a collection of Proverbs. Psalms, to some extent, especially from psalm to psalm, because that's kind of like our songbook, and they're put in there, and they may have some relation to the ones around it, but basically each one is its own individual song. It's appropriate just to look at, think about, ponder, meditate on an individual proverb. The biblical Proverbs can be read chapter by chapter, and if you read through the Bible in a year, you probably do that. But perhaps they are best pondered individually, like morsels to be chewed on, savored, or like a gem to be viewed from various angles. And another valuable study of the book of Proverbs is to study it topically, thematically. That is, and this was an assignment I gave to students when I was teaching wisdom literature at Penview, was a topical version of the Proverbs. Pull together all the ones that talk about the tongue. Pull together all the ones that talk about wealth and riches. That can give you some very powerful insights. So some Proverbs, we said, encourage wise behavior by pointing out the advantages, good consequences, value of wise behavior. In other words, the benefit of wisdom. And now we're at our lesson. Proverbs 3, 1 through 18 in the book, and in your quarterly. I'll go 1 through 20. And 19 and 20 at the end of the reading say, "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down dew." That section, that unit, this passage, Proverbs 3, 1 through 20, consists of 7 units. Each of the first 6 are a 2-verse segment that present wise behavior and then the good benefits or consequences. The 7th unit or segment comprises a concluding statement and 7 supporting assertions. So, and since we have very few moments left, let's, instead of reading straight through, you can do that, maybe have done that. Let's combine all of the wise behaviors and then, if we can get to it, all of the benefits. Wise behaviors in this passage, you can glance down through as we go. I will go sequentially. My son, if you want to be wise, verse 1, don't forget my law, rather keep it from your heart. Do whatever it takes to keep mercy and truth, both externally, you could literally bind them on your necks, or put them in on your wall. And internally, write them on your mind and heart. Verse 5 and 6, first part, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. And then, at least a very possible and likely meaning of a very familiar verse there, know God. It's not just acknowledge, it's the word that's used over and over and over throughout the Old Testament to mean know. Yada, I think it was. Know God, and your ways can imply all your daily activities. So know God in everything you do day by day. Verse 7, don't be wise in your own eyes. Don't think your own way of seeing things is necessarily wisdom. Rather, fear the Lord, which if you go back to Proverbs 1:7, is the starting point of all true wisdom. Depart from evil My son, you can't be wise and choose evil. Verse 9, honor the Lord, put him first in your use of your material possessions. In other words, this wisdom we're talking about is not esoteric. Can't blame that one on Dr. Dorsey. It's not way out there. It's eminently practical. It has to do with all your daily activities and all your earthly life and your material possessions. Put him first in that. And verse 11, whenever you start to get off track, you start veering from this way of wisdom, don't chafe under the Lord's chastening. Don't despise or get weary of his correction. He's doing it to bring you back to the way of wisdom. And thank the Lord he doesn't just let you go on without trying to bring you back. So verse 18, lay hold of wisdom. Keep her, retain her. That's the wise behaviors. And if you want to be wise, go through that and start living that way. What are the benefits? Well, verse 2, length of days, long life, peace. And by the way, that's probably a proverb, not a promise. Some get around that by saying, well, you'll live longer than you would have if you'd lived differently. Maybe true. But you know some people who lived very well and died pretty young. Think of the 5 that were martyred in Ecuador. Think of Sammy Morris. Think of Josiah, the king. Think of Jesus. Not extremely long life as we count long life. But anyway, this type of living, as a general rule, tends toward extending your life and giving you peace, well-being through that life. Benefits of wisdom, favor, and good understanding, verse 4, with God and man. Verse 6, it brings the Lord's own direction, because knowing him and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. As you know him on all your daily activities, he will be able to guide you. Verse 8, it gives health to your navel. You do want a healthy navel, don't you? It gives marrow to your bones. Well, probably these are figurative ways of expressing well-being, the broader meaning of shalom or peace. Verse 10, it brings plentifully filled barns and bursting out wine presses. Again, a proverb, not a promise. But in general, he does take care of your material needs. You'll be better off, even financially and materially. Just think of all the money that goes into tobacco and booze, if you live wisely. Verse 12, the Lord's love and delight will be in you, as evidenced by his fatherly discipline. He loves you and delights in you so much, he wants the best for you possible, so he will discipline you, but that's demonstration of his love and his delight. Verse 14, why you'll have greater value than silver or gold, fine gold. Verse 15, it's more precious than rubies. All the things that you can desire don't measure up to this wisdom, which, by the way, answers the prosperity gospel. And yet it does bring length of days and tends towards riches and honor. Verse 17, pleasantness and peace. Verse 18, tree of life and true happiness. Now, if you're still not convinced that wisdom is the wise way to live, verses 19 and 20 tell us that wisdom is what God used to create the universe and now sustain it, to govern it, meaning that he's woven throughout the fabric of this whole universe this matter of wisdom. So in summary, verse 13, happy is the person who finds wisdom and gets understanding. It almost sounds as if Solomon wants us to believe that finding, getting, laying hold of, retaining this wisdom ought to be the main thing of your existence and mine. And the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Do you agree? Good. Go do it. Shades of Odyssey Thanksgiving for those of you who caught it. Thank you. The Lord bless you. I guess we will let you pray.